The federal government delivered one of the most aggressive law enforcement offensives in modern U.S. history when FBI, ICE, DEA, and Homeland Security units launched a coordinated multi-city strike aimed directly at the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels, two of the most powerful narcotics empires on Earth. The result? 5,000 arrests, thousands of firearms seized, and roughly 4 tons of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine pulled out of circulation. But the true shockwave was not the size of the drug haul or the number of suspects taken into custody. It was the revelation that sheriffs, border agents, and even federal officers were among those quietly working for the cartels. For the administration, the message was blunt.
Our message to the drug traffickers is get the hell out of our country. Your free ride is over because President Trump is back in the Oval Office.
Senior officials echoed the sentiment, stating that every tool of American power, from federal policing to military intelligence, would be deployed to choke off the flow of lethal synthetic drugs, killing Americans by the tens of thousands. What unfolded over the following months reshaped the national conversation on narcotics, border security, and institutional corruption. Oh, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss any of America's cleansing operations. Let's get back into it. The surge begins, a historic multi-city crackdown. At 4 a.m., while Chicago and 21 other major U.S. cities slept, convoys of armored vehicles, tactical vans, and unmarked SUVs rolled out of staging centers. In a synchronized maneuver federal agents later called the Surge, thousands of personnel from the DEA, FBI, ICE, and Homeland Security investigations hit dozens of targets at once: stash houses, clandestine distribution hubs, financial fronts, and cartel-controlled safe locations. This was not a routine sweep. It was the largest multi-agency strike against organized crime since the war on drugs began. Chicago, the geographic heart of America, was the operational centerpiece. Its rail yards, interstate corridors, airports, and freight distribution centers had quietly become the primary transit point for cartel narcotics flooding through the country. Fentanyl, in particular, so potent that 2 milligrams can stop a human heart, was being funneled through Chicago before dispersing into the Midwest, the East Coast, and the South. Everything moves through here, the senior investigator explained. Drugs come in bulk, money goes out in bulk, and the whole system runs like a logistics corporation. Within months of the initial sweep, federal teams had dismantled drug labs, seized encrypted financial centers, broken apart money laundering networks, and arrested thousands of cartel operatives and street-level distributors. That alone would have been historic. But then came the discovery that forced the administration to rethink everything: a new kind of betrayal when law enforcement joins the cartel. As arrest reports piled up, federal analysts began noticing something deeply abnormal. Mixed in among traffickers and cartel foot soldiers were county sheriffs, border inspectors, corrections officers, and federal agents, individuals sworn to uphold the law, now exposed as key enablers of the very networks they were meant to fight. These officers had accepted bribes to wave trucks through checkpoints, ignore suspicious cargo, provide logistics intel, and suppress investigations. Some of them had done it for money, others were blackmailed. A few, investigators later revealed, had been compromised for years. The criminal threat was no longer entirely external. It had penetrated the institutions themselves. For many working the case, this was the moment the war fundamentally changed. The enemy wasn't only at the border or hidden in stash houses, it was embedded inside the system, responsible for protecting the country. The industrialization of poison. Beyond the corruption, the scale of the fentanyl crisis and the infrastructure behind it was staggering. Sinaloa and CJNG no longer operated like street-level gangs. They had become vast multinational supply chains, with chemists, accountants, production managers, and armed security contingents functioning like quasi-military forces. Chemicals from China and India arrived in Mexico disguised as industrial solvents. Super labs converted them into fentanyl at an industrial pace, millions of doses per week. From there, the synthetic opioids moved north hidden in farm trucks, passenger vehicles, shipping containers, or even within migrant flows. Once inside the United States, the drugs entered the hub in Chicago, where they were broken into smaller shipments and dispatched to Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New England, the Carolinas. This industrialized supply pipeline fueled a national catastrophe. More than 100,000 American overdose deaths per year, roughly 70% tied directly to fentanyl. Schools stocked Narcan, morgues filled to capacity, emergency rooms drowned in overdose cases. Addiction specialists warned that communities were dealing with poisoning events, not traditional drug addiction. Financial warfare, how cartels turned money into power. But even the lethal drug supply was only part of the crisis. As investigators traced the money moving through cartel networks, the picture became far more alarming. Funds collected from drug sales in Chicago, Houston, and Miami flowed into shell companies disguised as trucking firms, construction outfits, or consulting companies. From there, the money moved into offshore cryptocurrency exchanges, where it was layered, scrubbed, and anonymized. Clean funds then returned to the U.S. as legitimate investment capital. That capital infiltrated real estate, nightclubs, car dealerships, retail stores, trucking fleets, political campaigns, law enforcement adjacent service contracts. Bribes no longer came in envelopes. They appeared as consulting fees, board positions, and real estate partnerships. By late 2025, federal prosecutors uncovered evidence that the same accounts financing cartel gun shipments had also paid city contractors, political donors, and even police union vendors. This was not freelancing. It was structural corruption, strategic, organized, and long-term. Why the system became vulnerable? The roots of the problem were traced to a national breakdown in oversight. In a rush to secure the border after years of migrant surges, Homeland Security hired thousands of new agents on accelerated timelines. Background checks were abbreviated. Temporary clearances were granted without full review. Local police departments, overwhelmed with violent crime, accepted federal funding with little scrutiny attached. More money, more pressure, more personnel, and less accountability. One truth emerged: the cartels had evolved. They no longer focused on corrupting individuals. They targeted the bureaucracy itself, feeding weaknesses in hiring systems, procurement processes, and political fundraising networks. The shield was cracking from within. The two-phase national offensive. With intelligence analysts assembling a picture that resembled a corporate blueprint of criminal operations in more than 20 U.S. cities, federal agencies prepared for something unprecedented: a nationwide synchronized strike. Phase 1. Sinaloa targets, October 15. At dawn, helicopters circled Phoenix as tactical teams raided pill mills disguised as suburban homes. Thousands of counterfeit oxycodone tablets were seized. Over a week, 2,500 Sinaloa-connected suspects were arrested. Investigators seized pill presses, synthetic precursors, encrypted financial ledgers, and $85 million in cash. Phase 2. CJNG targets, 3 weeks later. If Phase 1 was surgical, Phase 2 was shock and awe. Port of Long Beach, agents seized container ships stacked with precursor chemicals hidden behind false industrial panels. Miami, raids hit high-end properties purchased through cryptocurrency laundering networks. Houston, tractor trailers loaded with military-grade weapons intended for cartel enforcement units were intercepted. Then came coordinated operations across 22 federal field divisions, sweeping up hundreds in Boston, Kansas City, New Jersey, Maryland, and more. When the offensive ended, the results were historic. 5,000-plus arrests, more than $200 million in drugs, cash, and assets seized, dozens of command nodes dismantled, supply routes across the U.S. disrupted. But the sense of victory was shadowed by an uncomfortable truth. The next battle wouldn't be fought in the streets. It would happen deep inside America's institutions. The financial Cold War. Even as dramatic footage of raids, seizures, and arrests dominated the news, a quieter war was unfolding behind the scenes, one fought not with weapons, but with data, financial forensics, and digital tracking. Because the true power of the cartels came not from violence, but from their ability to buy influence within American systems. Investigators found that cartel-connected accounts sent funds to municipal service contractors, political donors, law enforcement suppliers, private security firms, and lobby groups. It was corruption disguised as commerce. Major cases exposed officers who waved trucks through checkpoints, investigators who buried evidence, and supervisors who ignored warnings, all enabled by a bureaucratic system vulnerable to infiltration. This was not a crisis of individual misconduct. It was a structural vulnerability. From criminal organizations to terrorist designation. Given the scale of infiltration and the increasing lethality of cartel operations, the administration initiated a dramatic policy shift: the formal classification of Sinaloa and CJNG as foreign terrorist organizations. This move unlocked new authorities: Pentagon intelligence support, joint military law enforcement operations, expanded surveillance permissions, and coordinated foreign strikes with allied nations. Defense Secretary Pete Heck stated plainly, "If these cartels operate like insurgents, we will treat them like insurgents." Drug enforcement was no longer policing. It had become a counter-terror mission. A war now fought on 3 fronts. Even with the success of the surge, 3 unresolved crises remain. 1. The overdose epidemic continues. Synthetic opioids are cheap, easy to manufacture, and lethal. Supply reductions help, but demand remains massive. 2. Financial networks regenerate quickly. Cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts allow money to disappear and reappear with little trace. 3. Institutional corruption is still the greatest threat. After dozens of officers were indicted following the surge, confidence in law enforcement integrity took a major hit. The question haunting Washington isn't whether the cartels can be beaten, it's whether the institutions assigned to fight them are strong enough to withstand infiltration from within. What the surge truly proved. Despite the challenges, the surge demonstrated something vital, that when federal agencies unite behind a single mission, the impact can be seismic. The operation proved that U.S. institutions, though imperfect and strained, still possess immense power when mobilized with urgency and clarity. It showed that countless federal agents, analysts, and officers still uphold their oath with unwavering discipline and honor. It showed that America can still fight back. But it also served as a warning. Evil grows when ignored. Institutions crumble when fatigue replaces vigilance. And nations fall when they fail to confront threats, external or internal, with equal resolve. Now the responsibility shifts to the public. Will America continue this fight? Will citizens demand accountability, stronger borders, and reinforced protections for communities? Or will the cracks within the system widen? The surge was not the end. It was the opening chapter of a longer, far more complicated war.